Thank you for joining us today. I wanted to introduce myself. I'm Kathleen Doty. I am the Commercial Business Development Rep here at University Title. And this is my business partner, Romy Jackson, who acts as our VP of Commercial Services. I wanted to welcome you to University Title's Commercial Corner. We have been having a ton of fun talking with our guests that are acting various roles in commercial real estate here in San Antonio in the Hill Country arena. We've got another great podcast for you today, and we're glad to have a very special guest. Without further ado, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Kathleen. I am super excited about this podcast because we have a friend with us who does nothing, no, I won't say nothing, but primarily does farm and ranch in South Texas and in the Hill Country. And farm and ranch closings have always been my favorite closings. There's always some history to the land, whether it's family history or how far the family's owned it, generations. I like the people better than I do in a lot of other closings because they're pretty solid folks, and they always present a challenge. So I'm very, very pleased that we have Charles Beever III from Phyllis Browning Company here in San Antonio. Charles heads up the Farm and Ranch Division, and I certainly want you to talk a little bit about that as we get into this. And I also want to ask you, Charles Beever III, which indicates to me there's some history. I think maybe you're the fourth Charles Beever? Third Charles Beever. We need to get into that a little bit. But Charles, welcome aboard. We want to talk about farm and ranch sales, what you do for a living. If you would, tell us just a little bit about yourself, your upbringing, education if you choose, so us and our listeners can get to know you.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's good to be here. You almost stumped me with the first question. I am the fourth Charles Beever. The first one didn't have the same middle name, so there started the 1, 2, 3 started with the second, third, and fourth. So my great-great-grandfather moved to Frio County in the late 1800s, and my family's been there ever since. So I'm fifth generation from that beginning.
Raised in Pleasanton or in Frio County?
Pearsall. Yeah. Kindergarten through 12, graduated from Pearsall High School, and never left till college.
And tell us where you went to college. And
I went to Texas A&M, kind of followed in the footsteps of my father and my two uncles who had all gone there. When I might add, the Corps of Cadets was compulsory when they went, so they hadn't really kept up with the times, so they just assumed that was still the case, and so I did that, and was not sure how enthused I was while I was doing it, but I was very pleased after it was over that I'd done it.
Well, A&M's got a tremendous history and a tremendous tradition. We had a little conversation out front. I've over the years have become a huge fan of Texas A&M and the way that they hold to their traditions and seem to take care of one another, which is always. I'll never forget Mr. Zachary. This was years ago. I got to go to a luncheon at Aggie Park, and Mr. Zachary got up in front of 400 Aggies, and he spoke for about 30 minutes. But one of the things he said was, "I promise every one of you in this room, Aggie graduates, if you ever fall on hard times, you'll have a job. Now, it may be holding a stop sign on a highway. It may be moving barricades on a highway, but you will have a job." And I don't know of many other folks that would be able to make that statement and back it up. So,
Yeah. No,
always been very impressed.
It's true. It's lots of camaraderie and brotherhood there.
Well, how did you wind up in farm and ranch sales?
The way that really happened was I was in the cattle business, and when I got out of school, I wanted more than anything to find employment in a field that enabled me to be around horses, cattle, and to become fluent in Spanish. That was what was important to me. So that narrowed the fields down quite a lot, and went to work on ranches in South and far West Texas. And then I had an opportunity to go off on my own. I was single, young and didn't have a lot of, wasn't burdened by a lot of financial commitments. And so I thought the ideal thing to do would be go do what the people I had worked for did and turn cattle out and try to convert grass into beef. And so during that, say 5 or 8 year time period, I was partners with a good friend whose father was a buyer and seller of ranches, and he had a broker's license, and he was not an active broker. He did not engage in brokerage. He just bought and sold on his own account. And he told us one day, he said, boys, you ought to go get your real estate license because it's not going to ever get any easier than it is right now to get it, but it will invariably get harder and you'll have to take more classes and so forth. So we figured he knew what he was talking about, so we went out and got our real estate licenses and then promptly didn't do anything with it for 5 or 6 years.
And what time frame was this?
That would have been 96 to probably 01 or 2, and that would be when I started at Phyllis Browning, where I've been ever since.
You've been there a long time.
Mm-hmm.
Since the farm and ranch division was begun.
So in your cattle days, were you a producer? Were you?
Yeah, I primarily ran steers, so I would buy a weaned calf crop or individual animals from sale and assemble load lots and put them on, mainly winter them in South Texas, which of course we're good winter country, but not so much summer country. So then in the spring, we would either sell them or ship to the Flint Hills of Kansas and put gain on them up there.
I closed a man who sold a ranch. He owned a ranch in Brewster County, a couple 100,000 acres, huge ranch. This has been 20 years ago. He used to trailer his cattle. Now, Brewster County, far west Texas, dry, arid, a section for a cow-calf unit. He used to trailer his cattle to Montana every summer to feed them out in Montana and bring them back. And he said the cost of trailering them up there in the grazing rides was less than the supplemental feeding he would have had to do during the summertime in Brewster County.
Yeah, there's a term in the cattle business called compensatory gain, and it refers to an animal that's lived its life growing frame and getting older, but didn't have the groceries to achieve its potential. So now it's older, its body's bigger, its frame's bigger, and if you can take it somewhere where there's good grass, it has a lot of what's called compensatory gain coming to it, which is cheap gain, and so you can get by hauling them a good long ways if that's the situation.
And it's all dependent on Mother Nature. Mother Nature, the cattle market, and luck.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I worked on a ranch, one of my during my formative years in far west Texas in a adjacent county to Brewster, and it was I was out there by myself, and it was 30 miles down a caliche road to the pavement, and then it was another 32 miles to town.
And you're by yourself?
I was by myself.
How long did that process, how long were you there doing all that?
I stayed there for 2 years.
Oh.
And I remember one time, I don't know why this sticks in my mind, but I went 19 days without seeing another human.
What does that do mentally?
Well, my wife and I laugh about it sometime, but I don't mind being by myself if the need arises.
Mm-hmm. You've done it.
I don't require being around a bunch of other people.
Sure.
But I also like being around other people.
Sure.
It's fine.
I can imagine doing a lot of soul searching and thinking a lot during that time period.
Well, it was
And hard work.
It was one man on 85,000 acres, so there wasn't a whole lot of time for introspection, I guess.
Yeah. Well, I've got a question for you. So you started with Phyllis Browning. That was the first brokerage you joined. When you did join on, did you find anyone that acted as a mentor for you, or how did you jump in and get going?
You know, when I started there, the general manager for Phyllis Browning Company was a fellow by the name of Dave Phillips, also a former Marine.
I remember Dave, yeah.
Like Romy. And he he always had a kind of a twinkle in his eye and a smile on his face. And when he saw me, he'd usually corner me and give me something to be happy about, or give me some pointers that he thought I should know. And he was a good one.
That's awesome. So could you go to him for advice, questions?
Sure. Anytime there was I didn't know anything about
Sure.
real estate or how closings worked or what happened after you closed, and he just he made it all make sense.
So we all know that Phyllis Browning is a wonderful brokerage here in town. Can you tell us a little bit about the Farm and Ranch division and what makes that special and different?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, Phyllis been in business with her own company since the late 80s. And, I believe that it was a natural evolution for her to leverage all of her considerable goodwill, contacts, acquaintances, clients who also, in many cases, owned property or were potential ranch buyers. So it was a very symbiotic decision to start the Farm and Ranch division. And so I guess one way to describe it would be in hard times or tough times, there frequently would be something that occurred outside of my sphere of influence that was good because of her or because of someone else in the company. So a lot of referral type stuff.
How many Farm and Ranch guys were there at the time when
Really?
you joined on?
Really just, there was kind of 3 or 4, but there were some that were trying to do residential and Farm and Ranch, which is that gets tough.
Sure.
But really a small number to start out.
Yeah.
This is kind of a strange real estate market, not limited to farm and ranch. It's a strange commercial real estate market today. You're the buyers that you see, the people that are coming into, they're beginning to consider buying a farm, buying a ranch. Do you have a feel for how many of those are cash buyers versus how many may need financing?
Yeah, I think in my opinion, at least, ranches and agricultural / recreational pieces of real estate are largely discretionary purchases. So the typical buyer very well may, and more often than not does, obtain financing, but it's not out of any terrible need for financing. It's instead to avoid using his own money. And so the old adage that best way to get a loan is to prove that you don't need it. Right. That's kind of what's going on here. So I don't remember, I can't say that I remember the last time that I did one where the whole thing rode on the buyer's ability to obtain financing.
Right.
Typically, if the appraisal's short, the buyer will just pony up however much the shortage is and go on.
For those buyers that might need financing, whether it's a significant amount of the purchase price or half of it or less, are banks or traditional? Where are you going to point that buyer? A traditional bank, an ag lender, a cooperative lender?
There are great banks that aren't ag credit places. There are of course wonderful ag lenders that in the vein of the types of companies that require a lender, a borrower rather, to purchase stock in their bank, which then it used to be the Federal Land Bank, and then in the old days, and now it's Capital Farm Credit would be an example. They you buy the stock, which enables you to buy down your interest rate, and so at the end of the day, the borrower is wanting to find the best rate, and so we try to give them. I like to try to give them 3 different options and then let them take it from there.
Right. The ag lenders, some of those transactions I've closed, the borrower buys stock, but oftentimes at the end of the year, the borrower gets dividends
Right.
from Capital Farm Credit, which may offset their taxes, offset their operating costs.
Well, I think, and I don't mean to speak for them at all, but I think those types of banks like to point to the prior year dividend and say this made the effective interest rate point X of a point lower than it looked like on paper.
Right.
And so that's the kind of the goodie that you get that you don't get with a regular bank.
Right. Now, I don't mean to put you on the spot here. Just from your observation over the years, are the underwriting requirements significantly different between a traditional bank and an ag lender, a cooperative lender? Do you have a sense for that at all?
I haven't noticed one process being markedly different from the other.
Okay.
I will say the ag banks, the Capital Farm Credit style banks, typically have their own in-house appraisers, which can make logistics simpler and maybe quicker at times than a bank that has to contract with an outside appraiser. But at the end of the day, the processes seem to be very similar.
So I have a question. As you're working with sellers, are you seeing any commonalities about why they are choosing to maybe put their properties from ranch on the market?
You know, the recurring theme there, again, in what I'm seeing is it's usually a generational thing. Maybe this seller is trying to get their affairs in order because they've reached a certain age.
Sure.
And maybe they have children scattered out across the fruited plain, and they don't want to encumber them with a disposition of that asset in some future time. Then there are others that just want to try something different, and they've owned this place for a long enough period of time that has appreciated a handsome amount, and they're ready to move on down the road. But I'd say more often than not, it's a family situation of getting an estate in order.
Yeah. So from the buyer side, if I was looking to buy some property in South Texas, are there any concerns that you're seeing about safety? There are folks walking across the border down in South Texas. Are there any concerns that I might want to discuss with you about property, the safety of livestock, equipment, dwellings, anything like that?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up frequently, and since that's an area that I spend a lot of time in, and an area actually that I'm from, maybe I have a different outlook on it than someone who has a more tangential association with the border area. But this has been something that has been going on, I guess since the two countries quit being at war with one another. There's been some amount of immigration, and while it's true that it's increased considerably compared to how it was 10 years ago or 20 years ago, I would have to say that this is just a pendulum type deal that swings back and forth. And, if you take one data point, you might make the argument that, hey, maybe this will distress the market a little bit. This may be a great time to get in down there. But the same things have been happening. They're just happening perhaps more frequently now. I think if a person can find a place they like, feel safe there, and be able to have insurance, be able to find insurance for it, then they're got to do what they think best.
Sure.
This is apples and oranges, and I understand it's apples and oranges, but you're well versed in South Texas ranches. You're familiar with that market. You're also well versed with hill country properties, ranches. If I, is there a significant difference in your mind? I'm trying to figure out how to pose this question. If I said to you, Charles, I want to buy a ranch. I'm new to Texas, and all I've ever heard about Texans is you got to own a ranch. So I want to buy a ranch. Are you going to point me to the hill country? Are you going to point me to South Texas? You going to ask me what I intend to use the property for? I'm from Chicago and I don't know anything. So you're the expert, you're the pro. And I didn't really tell you this question was coming, so I apologize in advance.
Yeah, it's a good question, and it comes up more often than you might imagine. The number of times that we've all had to deal with buyers that didn't have a clear idea of what they wanted sort of puts the onus on us. Is it going to be, or your interest hunting? Do you want to do a lot of hunting? Do you want to drive around a vast acreage and not have to go down the same road every 15 minutes? Or is it more, do you and your spouse want to wake up and have a cup of coffee on the porch and see birds and views and maybe some clear water trickling down the stream? And though it becomes fairly apparent after you have several conversations with people what area they're after. The thing about South Texas is nobody wants to buy a place in South Texas by accident. They've heard about it. They know what's going on down there. They know that there are deer, and they know that there's hunting, and they know that all the bushes have thorns on them, and they're poisonous snakes, and it just kind of adds to the romance of it. So I think it'd be fair to say I've rarely had people say they want a place in South Texas and then be surprised at any of those aforementioned issues.
And hill country then might be more considered the natural beauty.
It's been my experience. Let me see if I can say this delicately. It's been my experience that the greater the say-so the wife has in the purchase, the higher the odds that they're going to wind up in the hill country.
A little more romantic. I can see that.
Well, so this is a commonality, I think, with possibly residential. If the wife doesn't like the house or the property, not all the time, but if the wife doesn't like it, the husband's not going to get it. You got to satisfy the. Well, that's interesting. I never thought that would be a consistency between farm and ranch property and residential. Thank you for educating me.
Good point.
That's right. The number of times someone has said, "Now I just need to bring my wife back." If we could push a button and make it where the wife had to be there the first time, we would probably have made a big dent in the gas and diesel consumption in the state.
Right. Is it possible to, if I wanted to start up a small cattle operation and I was willing to buy a couple of sections, 1,200 acres, will South Texas sustain a small cattle operation? Is it still suitable for running cattle, producing cattle?
That's something that I spent a fair amount of my life trying to do, and come from a background of ranchers and stock farmers. And the truth of the matter is, there's really no way, no other way to say it, but the agricultural value of land. Let me say it this way: the current market value of land is a large multiple of its agricultural value, so that the reason people want to have livestock, other than if they just like it and it makes them happy, is Texas, of course, has agricultural exemption for land, and the idea is that having cattle there enables them to keep this exemption, which is very favorable tax treatment, as it should be. We're producing food and fiber for our own country. I'm a big believer in that, reducing our dependence on others. But the notion that someone could buy a place of any size and pay for it running cattle on it, unfortunately, that ship has sailed, and it was a long time ago.
So is there anywhere, in your opinion, is there anywhere left in Texas where someone could buy a ranch, regardless of the size, and try to run a successful cattle operation?
Well, if by successful, if by successful you mean enough income to pay the taxes on it and some of the upkeep and maintenance, absolutely. I think that would be a realistic goal. If someone had an idea they wanted to go out and buy a piece of land and service the debt on it by running cattle on it, I think they'd have a rude awakening. Probably about the time the first note payment came due.
I was afraid you were going to say that. Texas has got such a rich tradition of world famous ranches. The King Ranch, the Goodnight Ranch up in the Panhandle, the Wagner Ranch back in the days before it got broken up, the Quadruple Six Ranch. I mean, we're known for our large ranches. Those large holdings that have been in families or owners for generations and generations, and often they're very remote, they're very rural. Do you see those staying single owner? Do you see those being split up in the future? Do you think those as legacy ranches, they'll remain legacy ranches?
I worked on some of those in the early '90s and mid '90s, and what I observed then and is certainly continuing on is, all good things must come to an end, and they're unfortunately the families, generations have children, and those children have children, and finally it becomes so fractured that it's untenable, and the also might say that the income that's being produced off of it in most cases is probably, once it gets split 40 ways or something, it's probably really not enough to move anybody's needle, and so that causes people to start thinking about selling. There are exceptions, of course, to that, but I think the general trend is, unfortunately, because I also painful to see some of those big places broken up.
Sure.
Well, I don't care if you're in Seattle or if you're in New York City. People I've talked to across the country over the years that aren't Texans, that don't know anything about Texas, always ask, do you have a ranch? Do you have a horse? And I'd say, no, I'm sorry. I live in town. I don't have a ranch or a horse. So we've got that reputation nationally for our ranches. Let me get back to South Texas versus Hill Country. This is a hard question to answer, and I realize that. Let's say we can make it apples to apples. Type of ranch, as far as we can get it. Amenities, as far as a home on the ranch. Water available, whether it's live water or stock tanks. Is there a significant difference in price per acre between a 640 acre Hill Country ranch and a 640 acre South Texas ranch? Is there significant?
Yes, there's a very significant difference there. The Hill Country, it's almost not. It's sort of counterintuitive, but it's almost not fair to say 640 and 640 just because the mean size place in the two respective geographical locations, the Hill Country is going to be much smaller. But in terms of price per acre, it's a multiplier. The Hill Country will be 2, 3, 4 times the price of South Texas, and it's not because it's certainly not because its agricultural value is superior or there's a multiple there. It's just supply and demand is the best way I can come up with an answer to that. But it's been that way, and as as prices go up, they sort of go up in lockstep.
Well, my limited experience in closing farm and ranch transactions has been that hill country area ranches are typically going to be quite a bit pricier than what you're going to find down in South Texas. And I think we've already figured out that I'm not going to buy a ranch looking to service debt, looking to provide any kind of profit, whether it's a hunting operation, whether I've got exotics, whether I'm trying to raise cattle, whether I'm trying to raise sheep or goats. It's going to be discretionary. Have I got that figured out?
Yeah, and at the risk of those prior comments sounding despondent or derogatory toward the purchase of land, I hasten to add that the terrific, unbelievable, rare thing about land is it appreciates, and it seems like every 6, 7, 8 years, the prices are about double what they were at the beginning of that term. So the fact that you can't operate and make a mint of money is that's not the point. The point is that it's an asset that unlike a stock certificate or piece of commercial real estate or precious metal, it's an asset that you can enjoy. You can go touch it and smell it and drive around and take your kids and learn stuff and have fun and spend the weekend. And it's also an asset that's appreciating while you're doing all that. So, I think a lot of people have that figured out. And to me, the only way a person could get hurt owning land would be if they didn't have staying power and they were forced to sell at an arbitrary time that happened to be a bad time.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, my father taught me at a young age that God is not making any more real estate. So if you've got that sizable piece, either in South Texas or the Hill Country, there's always going to be some demand for it, and there'll certainly always be the appreciation factor.
So you have been with Phyllis Browning for how many years now?
I think 22-ish.
Okay. So looking back on when you started, if you had a conversation with somebody that was wanting to get into farm and ranch sales, what kind of advice would you give this person?
There would be, that'd probably be a pretty long conversation. I think, and this is really, I've witnessed this since I started doing this. We do have a generation of sharp youngsters that know a lot. They consume a lot of information off the internet and off social media, and that's great. And they know stuff that I certainly didn't know. If I rewind back to when I was that age, I think the thing that they might need to bone up on is the interpersonal relationships, knowing how to talk on the phone, knowing that brevity is the soul of wit. Not every phone call needs to last 30 minutes. And if someone talks to you, look them in the eye and talk back to them. And, maybe I'm hopelessly old-fashioned romantic, but I think those things are still important. And if they're not, they should be.
Absolutely. I mean, you want to work with someone that you trust, that you like, that you feel you're respected, that you're heard. And I can imagine that a lot of these things are innate qualities or learned things that, you've honed your craft over these years and you understand how to speak to people and what their needs are. And I fully agree. I mean, just even in our industry, it's customer service and learning how to speak to your clients. Very important. So, in the same breath, what was the best advice you were given at any, well, I guess early on or at any point in your career?
I think I'll have to give Phyllis the credit for this one, but this is such a universally good in my business, any real estate business, such a good piece of advice. Call them back and don't do it later, do it sooner.
Sure.
And now that's, of course, from 20 something years ago when I first heard her say that. Now it's text and it's email and it's other things, but there's nothing that to me anyway, there's nothing that screams out competence and being engaged like a quick reply
Sure.
to a question, even if it's not sure, I'm going to have to find that out.
Mm-hmm.
But the next day reply, that's no bueno, to use some of my Spanish I referred to earlier.
Mm-hmm. How much are you using your Spanish?
From time to time, it comes in pretty handy.
Yeah.
Seems like a lot of times it's some of the different kinds of brush or the
Sure.
different kinds of trees or something,
Yeah.
and I don't know. It's something that was very important to me, and I'm happy when I get to use it.
Oh, I agree. I grew up in South Texas as well. Spanish was a very integral part of daily life, and a lot of it was Tex-Mex, but it was just something that we grew up hearing and learning, and we've got kids in the same schools, and so I've got my boys in Spanish immersion program, and I feel like it's such an important thing to learn if you have the ability, if you have the means to learn that, because I can only imagine how instrumental it is for your daily life.
It's handy. When I was a kid, I would be riding around in the pickup with my dad, and he would start talking to someone in Spanish, and if you closed your eyes and didn't know him, you wouldn't know that he was a gringo.
Yeah.
Like it was just such a natural accent, and never struggled for words. And there was an old gentleman who worked on the farm who had been there a long time, and he told me one time, he said, and your grandfather said, your father speaks good Spanish, your grandfather speaks better Spanish than him. This, of course, is all in Spanish.
Sure.
And your great-grandfather, even better than your grandfather.
Yeah.
So
I love that.
I wanted to be in the mix somewhere.
Sure. So are you teaching the kids Spanish?
Yeah,
as much as you can?
To an extent.
Sure.
Yeah, we've done a little bit of immersion,
Yeah.
and they're maybe at the age right now where they're not just on the edge of their seat trying to absorb information
Sure.
from me. But
I understand.
one of these days.
I understand. My kids speak it all day at school, and by the time they get home, they are done. But it's a wonderful thing, and a goal of mine is to learn more Spanish. I just think that for our industry and what we're trying to do here in South Texas and Central Texas, it's very important. Kind of following up, I guess I will ask this. Do you have anything else that you wanted to bring up or share with our listeners?
I think my satisfaction in doing what I do stems from the confidence that I have. For starters, let me just back up by saying sales is never something that I saw myself doing. I loathe the thought of someone trying to sell someone something that they didn't want or need. And I think my comfort zone and my confidence in doing this is that I'm a true believer that land is an asset that belongs in everyone's portfolio, and so it's not a struggle, because if they don't buy one, then you feel like that you failed them and caused them to be worse off than they would have been if they'd bought one. So it's I think going back to what you would talk to new people and youngsters about it, I think having that belief component that you really believe in it, and not just, hey, this, I grew up hunting on my dad's lease, we drive around in the Jeep and, have a gun with us and have all this fun. So I want to go sell ranches. Well, that may not be the right reason. Like,
Right.
I think the layers of the onion need to be peeled back a little deeper than that to really make sure that you believe in it as not only a asset class, but a way of life.
Sure. I mean, you're facilitating, you're acting as a mentor and a guide for these folks that are either needing to buy or sell, and really educating and helping, and you have experience. So you've lived it, you breathed it, and anyway, we're very, very thankful that you came on our show today. I've got one final question, and Romy, I don't know that he loves this question.
Sorry, she's stubborn.
It's what I do. And I love to end with our guest, because I think it's just a very common thing amongst San Antonio and any South Texas family or just folks it's a big question. Where does your family like to get breakfast tacos? Say on the weekend or just when, lazy weekends? What's your go-to?
This could take as long as the rest of the thing has taken up
Good.
until this point. This could be a lengthy answer. So my wife likes corn tortillas, and the rest of us like flour tortillas. So that really starts cutting down the Venn diagram gets real narrow on that, because a place that has good flour tortillas may not have good corn, and vice versa. So we have a bunch of them, but the other thing is you don't want to have to go 30 minutes away to get it, because they're going to be cold when you get back,
That's right.
and everybody's going to be unhappy
And hungry.
So yeah, I like, of course, everyone's standby. Thousand Oaks makes good tacos
On Austin Highway.
They're well liked on Austin Highway. Van Diver.
Mm-hmm.
And then what may come as a surprise to some people, the little place across the street, Los Dos Laredos.
With the blue roof?
The one that has the drive-through that
Yes.
you have to back up about 5
Yes.
times to keep from hitting the pillar.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, they have it.
Laredo's number 4, to be specific.
Oh wow, I didn't realize.
Yes,
that
that is my children's favorite.
And then more recently, right on Broadway, there's a Cella's opened up by the marble slab ice cream place, and they're the sweetest people in there.
Yes.
I loved giving them business. They don't open till like 8:00 though,
Yep.
so that's an issue sometimes. But yeah, I'm a big fan of spreading that around and learning something new.
Sure.
And yeah.
I love that. But those are some of my family's favorites as well. So I'm glad that we share that.
I got a question for you that was not on. We didn't discuss it, but I saw you pull up in your pickup. How many miles? Just to those folks that want to get in farm and ranch, how many miles do you put on your truck a year?
For an average year, it's about 30,000.
That's not bad.
About 30,000 miles a year. Yeah. So yeah, I think my pickup's got 90,000 miles on it, and it's 3 years old. So that, yeah.
That's
Got
way
averages.
less than I thought it was going to be. I guess I was thinking far west Texas, where you got to drive 100 miles to get.
Yeah,
to
the average, I don't want to say average, but the normal,
Pardon me.
the normal distance away a ranch would be, under 70 miles ordinarily.
Right.
So, it's not, and then once you get there, a lot of times you're jumping in a side by side or something. And even if you're not putting that many miles on it, driving it around. But yeah, it's more than some fields of endeavor for
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
Right. Well, we're running out of time, Charles. I can't thank you enough for agreeing to do this. We met Charles. We had lunch about 2 months ago. And I think we'd wound up getting to close a transaction for you that was transferred over here to the title you had title company had some issues.
Did a masterful job, I might add.
Well,
Thank
appreciate
you.
that. We appreciate that. And nothing against the other title company. They were in some technical difficulties and they had to move the transaction, but thank you. We appreciate it. But when we had lunch with you, this idea of a podcast was still a tiny, tiny, tiny seed. But I was thinking, Kathleen and I talked about it, man, if we ever get that podcast going and we do in Farm and Ranch, we got to ask Charles Beever to join us and to be our guest. So thank you, Charles. It's Charles Beever, Beever the third, Phyllis Browning here in San Antonio. I've gotten emails from him at 5:12 in the morning, so I know Charles is an early riser, and he will take your phone call if you are in that situation where you need to look at some ranches. So, Charles, on behalf of Kathleen, myself, University Title Company, we thank you for joining us for our commercial corner. Man, anytime we do this, we'd love to have you come back.
Thanks for having me. It's been my pleasure.